Hey everyone, this is Stephen Judge, a clinical naturopath nutritionist from Sydney, Australia, coming at you from the Holistic Medical Centre in Surrey Hills. Today I wanted to highlight something I've noticed as I continue to work with more and more clients who've been diagnosed with autoimmune thyroid disease. And so this includes Hashimoto's thyroiditis and also Graves' disease. So autoimmune thyroid diseases such as Hashimoto's and Graves are basically conditions where the thyroid is either under-functioning or performing, which is classic Hashimoto's, or hypothyroidism, so low thyroid function, or where the thyroid gland is over-functioning, which is classic Graves' disease, or hyperthyroidism. And so the thyroid gland is responsible for producing hormones that control metabolism of all the cells in the body, which is really important. So that means in hypothyroidism or underfunctioning thyroid, everything slows down. So the classic symptoms of Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism are fatigue and sluggishness, constipation, so the bowels slow down, very flat kind of depressive mood, also hair loss, very dry skin, cold hands and feet due to kind of sluggish and poor, slow circulation. And in hyperthyroidism, everything speeds up really quick. So, there's a lot of anxiety, heart palpitations, nervousness, diarrhea, increased gut motility, and also they tend to be very hot. They have an increased sensitivity to heat due to this increase in metabolism. And so with autoimmune thyroid diseases such as Hashimoto's and Graves', the underlying cause is that the cells within the thyroid gland, which is located just around here, they're being destroyed by antibodies. So it's more related to the immune system kind of going out of control. And so these antibodies, they bind to the thyroid gland and they prevent the body from producing the thyroid hormones, which leads to all those different symptoms of either an underactive or an overactive thyroid gland. So to truly get to the underlying cause of an autoimmune thyroid condition, we have to consider all of the potential causes and drivers of immune dysfunction that we see in autoimmunity and that are contributing to the increased production of thyroid antibodies. So we really have to think about what is driving that, because that is how we're going to get to the root cause. And so, in this category, there are a variety of things that can trigger thyroid antibodies. And so these include gluten, heavy metals such as lead, mercury, aluminium, infections, so bacterial infections or viral or mycoplasmas, dietary allergies, and/or intolerances can be a factor here, so figuring out what's going on there and dealing with those. Gut dysbiosis, so imbalanced gut flora, chemical exposure and environmental toxicity. So there's quite a lot to consider with autoimmunity and what could be triggering and perpetuating this antibody production and immune dysfunction in a certain individual. So these are the main factors to consider with autoimmune thyroid disease as well. So now, obviously, this is a large list. It can seem quite overwhelming if you are considering where do I start. And so, as I say to all my clients, we always start with the gut, because regardless of toxins and metals that are sitting there, and regardless of all the supplements and herbs that could be effective at getting antibodies down and supporting the thyroid, the digestive function and detoxification organs and pathways, and just the gut overall, it needs to be strong. And intestinal hyperpermeability, which is another word for leaky gut, that needs to be addressed too, because as we keep learning, in people who do have genetic predisposition to autoimmunity, a leaky gut is likely to be the triggering event for developing autoimmune diseases. And it will continue to exacerbate something like high antibody production and therefore thyroid symptoms. So it's for this reason these days in clinic, every single person I meet with any sort of autoimmune condition, including Hashimoto's and Graves', I recommend straight up, like, don't waste any time guessing, and let's get into ordering comprehensive gut microbiome testing so that we can get this blueprint of what's going on with someone's gut and treat this component really well, because this part of treatment will essentially be the foundation of supporting and managing the autoimmune condition and getting the antibodies down, reducing the chronic inflammation and balancing the immune dysfunction, therefore treating the cause. And, you know, I say this to everyone with autoimmune conditions, regardless of whether or not they have like chronic gut symptoms. I still get them to order the test, because lo and behold, there are always overgrowths and or infections sitting there, and or low beneficial bacteria and leaky gut. So, you know, in my clinical experience, you don't actually have to have these kind of chronic digestive symptoms. I still highly recommend going in and looking at the microbiome, because it will always be a factor. And so what I've discovered over the past few years is that a large percentage of clients I've worked with who are predominantly women who have Hashimotos or Graves' disease, they've come back on their stool test with high levels of Helicobacter pylori. You know, and incredibly, most of them were these people who didn't really have gut symptoms or a history of a chronic gut issue. So, you know, Helicobacter pylori infection, which actually resides in the stomach, you know, they have pretty intense symptoms classically, like abdominal pain that's worse in between meals on an empty stomach, a lot of chronic belching and nausea and bloating. So when this has come back on a stool test, I always refer these clients to get a urea breath test for an official diagnosis through a gastroenterologist, as this is the gold standard of diagnosis for Helicobacter. A stool test showing Helicobacter doesn't automatically mean there's an active infection. It could just be passing through like dead DNA due to food contamination, for example. So always send them off for confirmation with the gastroenterologist. And, you know, however, in the large handful of clients that I've seen, we have confirmed an active infection via a urea breath test with extremely high levels. And so we've been able to kind of work on getting their antibodies down by focusing on treating this infection, as well as the other overgrowths and stuff that was lingering there on their gut microbiome test. And this is why a comprehensive gut microbiome test is important. Like, you don't want it to miss anything, such as a Helicobacter infection that might be sitting there. So as I started to see this pattern in so many women, you know, I thought, well, what does the research say? Because I'd never actually taken a proper look. And in 2017, a meta-analysis on the correlation between Helicobacter and autoimmune thyroid disease. So a meta-analysis is basically a study design that reviews all of the previous research on a certain topic. So this meta-analysis on Helicobacter and autoimmune thyroid disease basically concluded that the infection correlated with both Graves' disease and Hashimotos, and that it may play a role in their pathogenesis or their development. And, you know, the eradication of the Helicobacter could reduce the thyroid antibodies. So, you know, this is pretty important information, and it was something that I hadn't come across in my studies when I was a student. But lo and behold, you know, welcome to the world of integrative medicine and healthcare. Everything's constantly evolving. We are constantly learning and making new discoveries. And this is, you know, this analysis was only done a few years ago. And, you know, so it continues to support my own approach, I guess, to ensuring that with autoimmunity, we're addressing the gut microbiome and considering any or all other lurking active infections, such as Helicobacter, which, like I said before, resides in the stomach. But luckily enough, in my case, you know, we've picked it up through microbiome testing, because with an active infection, the DNA of the Helicobacter is passing through the stool. So just a quick case study as an example. I've been working with this amazing client for a while now, who I will call Grace for confidentiality purposes. And Grace came to see me at the clinic because she had been diagnosed with Graves' disease around 5 years prior to seeing me. And so she was experiencing like a rapid weight loss, palpitations, and an irregular heartbeat. She had anxiety, she couldn't sleep, and so her doctors did testing. They picked up the thyroid antibodies for Graves' disease, and they were quite high. So she was put on medications to calm that hyperactive thyroid hormone response, and her symptoms came down quite dramatically. And despite coming down, though, she had started to develop some other symptoms like some rapid weight gain. She felt quite flat mood-wise, and she had recently had a miscarriage. So because of this, her doctors had advised her just to basically have a complete thyroidectomy. So they had advised that she get rid of her thyroid gland once and for all, so she'd need to rely on medication for that for the rest of her life. So at that point, she decided first to look at a few other avenues, and she ended up booking in to see me. So when I met Grace, she'd never really heard much about this potential link with the gut and autoimmune diseases and thyroid disease. And again, nor did she have any gut symptoms, nor did she have no history of gut issues at all. And so she was rightly so, unsure if it was kind of worth getting into. We had a big chat about it, but in the end, she decided to choose to go down this path. And lo and behold, there was an active infection of Helicobacter. It was quite high. This was confirmed on a urea breath test. And so by treating the Helicobacter in combination with a huge amount of other infections and overgrowths that were picked up in her gut microbiome test, we've been able to very successfully manage her condition and get the thyroid antibodies down and wean her off her medication. And so this is the beauty of integrative, complementary, and individualized medicine. Not everyone with autoimmune disease will have a Helicobacter infection as one of their drivers. However, in this individual's case, it was an important piece of her own unique puzzle. And this is the whole point of this style of healthcare. It's basically like trying to figure out a complex puzzle, and it has many different layers, and we need to sit back and think about what all the potential drivers are and how to go about identifying and addressing them properly. And so in our world, I guess the big things that we look at that the conventional medical route may not, that really affect autoimmune disease progression, the gut microbiome and heavy metals and environmental toxicity and HPA dysfunction, which is a result of chronic and unmanaged stress. So I hope this has been helpful, and if you or anyone you know with autoimmune thyroid issues or any autoimmune thyroid disease for that matter, share this sort of information with them, keep digging. If you are not getting answers or solutions, perhaps consider going down this naturopathic and integrative model of healthcare, because there may be something there, like Helicobacter, that is one of your drivers. Thanks, guys.